Yo, what's good? What's going on? Welcome to Q&A. Questions need answers. I'm your host, Munch, and today I got a question for you. What does success look like? And I mean really, not what social media says success is, not what society says success is, not what people told you it was supposed to look like, but what does success actually look like to you? Because I think a lot of us spend our whole lives chasing success without ever really stopping to define what it means for ourselves. We inherit ideas, we inherit expectations, we inherit pressure, and somewhere along the way, we start moving toward a destination we never even chose consciously. So today, I really want us to sit with this conversation honestly, not to judge anybody, not to preach, but to reflect, to think critically, and maybe even challenge some of the things we've accepted without question. Because who decides what success is anyway? Who decides what making it is supposed to look like? Was it our parents? The environment we grew up in? School? Television? Social media? What did success look like where you came from? Depending on where you grew up, success may have looked completely different. For some people, success meant making six figures. For others, success meant simply surviving, making it home safe, keeping food on the table, staying out the streets, taking care of family, getting an education, owning a home, being respected, being free. And I think sometimes we forget how much our environment shapes the way we think, especially as black people, especially for people growing up in communities where opportunities may have been limited, where survival itself was already a challenge. Because when you grow up around struggle, your definition of success naturally becomes tied to escape, to stability, to security. And there's nothing wrong with that. But at some point, I think we have to stop and ask ourselves, did we actually choose our definition of success? Or did we inherit it? Did we define it? Or did we just start chasing what everybody else was chasing? Because if we're honest, a lot of us have never really sat down and asked ourselves that question deeply. We just move, graduate, work, build, grind, repeat. And again, there's nothing wrong with ambition, nothing wrong with wanting more. But I think there's a difference between pursuing something intentionally and blindly chasing the image of success that may not even align with who you are anymore. I think social media completely changed the psychology of success too. Because now success has become tied to instant gratification. Everybody got a method. Everybody got a course. Everybody got a blueprint to make six figures in 30 days. And a lot of it is marketed like success requires no effort anymore, no skill, no dedication, no sacrifice. Just follow this formula and magically your life changes overnight. And I think that mindset is dangerous because real success, sustainable success, usually requires time, failure, discipline, consistency, growth. But now people feel pressure to become successful fast. And if it doesn't happen fast, they feel like they're losing or behind or failing. And I think that creates anxiety for a lot of people, especially younger people trying to figure life out in real time. Because nobody's posting the process anymore. Nobody's posting the struggle. Nobody's posting the years it took to really build something meaningful. Everybody is just posting the outcome, the highlight reel, the money, the lifestyle, but not the work that it actually took to get there. And I think we got to start asking ourselves, are we chasing success? Are we chasing the appearance of success? And at what point do we stop performing and start living? Because I've realized something as I've gotten older. There's a difference between looking successful and actually feeling fulfilled. And those two things are not always the same. Some people got money, but no peace. Some people built careers, but lost themselves in the process. Some people achieve status, but still feel empty inside. Some people got access, but no real connection to people anymore. And I think we need to normalize having those conversations too. Not just celebrating success, but talking honestly about what success costs sometimes. Because nobody really talks enough about the emotional side of success. The pressure, the expectations, the burnout, the isolation, the fear of failing, the fear of not becoming what people expected you to become, especially as black men, especially for people coming from communities where the stakes already feel high. Because sometimes success doesn't feel like opportunity. Sometimes it feels like pressure, responsibility, survivor's remorse. Like you can't afford to fail because too many people are depending on you. And I know there's people listening right now who understand exactly what I mean. As you get older, success starts looking different. Health matters different. Peace matters different. Time matters different. Relationships matter different. Being able to wake up and genuinely enjoy life matters different. And I don't think we talk enough about how our priorities evolve over time. When you're younger, success is often tied to what you can attain: the job, the money, the recognition, the lifestyle, the image. But as life starts happening, your perspective changes. You realize peace is valuable, time is valuable, mental health is valuable, alignment becomes valuable. And sometimes you start realizing that the version of success you've been chasing doesn't even fit your life anymore. And that could be a hard realization, because then you got to ask yourself, what am I really building? And who am I becoming in the process? And is all of this actually making me happy? What have you outgrown? What are you still holding on to just because you feel like you're supposed to? What does success feel like, not just look like? Because there's people out here living lives that look amazing from the outside, but internally, they're exhausted, disconnected, unfulfilled. And I think more people are dealing with that silently than we even realize. And then there's another level to all of this. What does success look like beyond just us as individuals? What does success look like collectively? What does success look like as a community? Because one thing I've really been thinking about lately is how personal success can sometimes slowly disconnect people from community. Not always intentionally. Sometimes life just starts moving fast. Your environment changes, your income changes, your circle changes, your priorities change. And before you know it, you become disconnected from the very people and places that help shape you. And another thing I've really been thinking about lately: when did success become isolation? Because growing up where I grew up, everybody lived together. Doctors, lawyers, electricians, plumbers, retail workers, managers, and those guys in the street. Everybody existed in the same community. on the same blocks. And there was something powerful about that because success still felt connected to community. People didn't completely disconnect once they became successful. But now people get money and leave. And a lot of times they never come back until the neighborhood starts getting redeveloped. And by then, the same elders and families that helped shape the culture of the neighborhood are getting priced out, forced out, disconnected from the community they built. And I think we really got to sit with that. Because what does success mean if the people who laid the foundation for the community can no longer afford to live there? What does progress really look like if the people who made the neighborhood what it was don't get the benefit from that progress? And I'm not saying people shouldn't grow. I'm not saying people shouldn't evolve. I'm asking, what does it look like to grow without disconnecting from your people? What does success look like when it includes other people too? Can we really call ourselves successful if everybody around us is still struggling? Can we really celebrate individual success while community conditions continue declining? And I know that's uncomfortable to think about, but that's exactly why I wanted to have this conversation. Because I think we need more spaces where people can think critically together, objectively, honestly, without immediately becoming defensive, without every disagreement turning into division, without every conversation becoming polarized. Because somewhere along the way, it feels like people stopped listening to understand and started listening just to respond. And I think we desperately need spaces where people can have the hard conversations out loud, which is really what I want Q&A to become. I want Q&A to become a place where we can have the difficult conversations honestly, a place where we can challenge ideas respectfully, a place where we can hear different perspectives without immediately demonizing each other, a place where we can think critically, ask better questions, and still see each other's humanity at the end of the conversation. Because right now, everything feels divisive, especially online. Black men versus black women. Everybody reacting to clips, sound bites, out of context moments. People forming opinions off 30 seconds of content without understanding the full conversation, without context, without nuance, without listening. And somewhere along the way, it feels like people stop trying to understand each other. Now it's just reaction, division, algorithms feeding outrage. And I think we desperately need spaces where people can slow down and really talk again. Not yell, not perform, not debate for clicks, but actually think critically, listen fully, and understand both sides of a situation before immediately choosing one. For those of y'all listening who may not know me from a can of paint, my name is James Munch II. Most people know me as Munch. And in the words of Langston Hughes, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. Achieving success for me at times felt like a dream deferred. And somewhere along the way, I realized success isn't a destination. It's a journey of growth, grace, gratitude, humility, healing, empathy, and endurance. As a jit growing up in Liberty City, my understanding of success came from men I saw around me. Men like Marshall L. Davis, Bernard Coates, Darren Ferguson, Coach Sam Johnson, Coach Lavelle, Coach JP and Chavez, Coach Pete, Coach Craig, Dr. Steve Gallen III, Daryl Sharpton. Mr. Davis taught me that you don't have to be the loudest in the room to command the room. Sometimes presence speaks louder than words. Sometimes discipline speaks louder than performance. And Dr. Gallen, whether you were one of his students or not, made everybody in Liberty City feel like failure was not an option. Growing up around men like that mattered because representation matters, exposure matters. Seeing successful black men who still cared about community mattered because for a lot of us, those examples shaped how we viewed leadership, how we viewed success, how we viewed responsibility. Men who gave us real game, men who poured into us, men who reminded us we could be more than our circumstances, men who taught us the importance of community, of leadership, of giving back. And because of men like that, success felt attainable. Success felt possible. Success felt cool. Success felt like something all of us deserved. And honestly, that's part of why I said yes to doing this show. Because when I was approached about Q&A, I had to ask myself the same question I'm asking y'all today. What does success look like? And for me, it wasn't about metrics. It wasn't about attention. It wasn't about going viral. It was about alignment. Does this align with my growth, my values, my purpose? Can this become a space where we can have meaningful dialogue about the state of the black community in diaspora, locally, statewide, nationally, and globally? Can this become a place where black people think deeper, listen harder, reflect more honestly? Can we create conversations that actually move people forward, personally, professionally, collectively? Because if we can do that, then maybe success looks different than what we were originally taught. Maybe success isn't just what we attain individually. Maybe success is about what we build together. Welcome back to Q&A, Questions Need Answers on WMBM AM 1490. I'm your host, Munch, and before the break, we were talking about success. And before the break, we were talking about success, how we define it, where those definitions come from, and what happens when the version of success we've been chasing no longer aligns with who we are becoming. But now, I want to take the conversation a step further, because once you start questioning your definition of success, what comes next? What do you rebuild from there? What does success actually look like in practice? Not online, not performative, but in real life. If we're being honest, a lot of people never really had the luxury of defining success beyond survival. For a lot of people, success was simply making it through the day, paying rent, keeping food in the refrigerator, keeping the lights on, taking care of family, avoiding becoming another statistic. And I think sometimes conversations around success can become disconnected from reality, because everybody isn't starting from the same place. Everybody doesn't have the same access, the same opportunities, the same safety net, the same exposure. And that matters, because it's hard to think about fulfillment when you're still trying to survive. It's hard to focus on purpose when you're overwhelmed by pressure, economic pressure, family pressure, life pressure. And I think sometimes people who've always had access don't fully understand what survival mode actually does to people mentally. Because when you grow up in environments where instability is normal, you start making decisions based on survival first, not purpose, not fulfillment, survival. And there's a difference, because survival teaches urgency. It teaches reaction. It teaches short-term thinking sometimes. Not because people are incapable of thinking bigger, but because life conditions people to focus on what's immediately in front of them. So when people ask, why don't people save more? Why don't people invest? Why don't people think long term? Sometimes the answer is deeper than discipline. Sometimes people have never experienced enough stability to even think long term consistently. And I think we need more empathy around that. Because there's people who are incredibly talented, incredibly smart, incredibly capable, but mentally exhausted from constantly trying to survive. And survival mode changes your nervous system. It changes your decision making. It changes how you trust people. It changes your relationships. It changes how you see the future. And that's a real conversation too. And then when people finally do reach certain levels of success, another pressure starts showing up. The pressure to maintain it. The pressure to keep producing. The pressure to keep proving yourself over and over again. And I think a lot of people are emotionally exhausted right now. Not physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Because success today almost feels like performance. Like you constantly have to prove your worth publicly. You got to post the wins, post the grind, post the accomplishments, post the lifestyle. And if you disappear for too long, people start assuming something's wrong. But what if success also means rest? What if success means peace? What if success means having enough freedom to slow down sometimes? Because I think we've normalized burnout so much that people almost feel guilty resting, guilty slowing down, guilty protecting their peace. And that's dangerous. Because eventually, if everything becomes grind culture, you lose yourself in the process. You lose relationships. You lose balance. You lose joy. You lose perspective. And then one day you wake up with everything you thought you wanted and still feel empty. And another thing I've noticed, the higher people climb sometimes, the more isolated they become. And I don't know if enough people talk honestly about that. Because people celebrate the money, the status, the achievements, but nobody really talks about the loneliness that can come with growth sometimes. Especially when your mindset changes before your environment changes, or your environment changes before your relationships evolve. Sometimes success creates distance, not intentionally, but naturally. And then people start feeling like they can't fully relate to where they came from anymore, while also not fully feeling accepted in the spaces they're entering. And that can create an identity crisis too. Because now you're in between worlds, too successful for one environment, not fully accepted in another. And I think a lot of people silently carry that tension every day, especially black professionals, black entrepreneurs, black creatives, people trying to elevate while also trying to stay connected to community. Honestly, I think that's part of why some people emotionally disconnect after they become successful. Because sometimes isolation becomes a defense mechanism. And I think that's why community matters so much. Because success was never meant to happen in isolation. Nobody gets anywhere completely alone. Nobody. Somewhere along the way, somebody poured into you. Somebody encouraged you. Somebody gave you game. Somebody gave you an opportunity. Somebody opened the door. Somebody believed in you before you fully believed in yourself. And I think we lose sight of that sometimes once success becomes individualistic. Because the culture now pushes hyper-independence. Everybody want to be self-made. Everybody want to feel like they did everything alone. But the truth is, community is part of the reason any of us became successful in the first place. Honestly, that's one of the things I miss most about growing up in the city. People knew each other. People checked on each other. People corrected each other. People poured into each other. And even though we had struggles, there was still community. There was still connection. There were still people who felt responsible for the next generation. And I worry sometimes that we're losing that. Not because people are bad people, but because life became more isolated, more digital, more transactional, more individualistic. And I also think black men specifically carry a different type of pressure that we don't always talk about openly. Because for a lot of black men, success becomes tied to worthiness, what you provide, what you achieve, what you can afford, what status you reach. And when that pressure starts early, it shapes your entire identity. You start feeling like you only matter when you're producing, when you are succeeding, when you're achieving. And that's dangerous. Because what happens when you're struggling? What happens when life hits? When life be lifing? What happens when life be lifing? What happens when you fail? Do you still feel worthy then? Do you still feel valuable then? And I think a lot of men silently struggle with those questions every day. But we don't always have spaces to talk about it honestly. And that silence turns into stress. And that silence turns into stress, depression, isolation, anger. Because people keep expecting strength without acknowledging the emotional weight people are carrying internally. And then when you add social media into it, and now people mostly interact through opinions instead of relationships, everybody is debating, everybody is reacting, everybody's choosing sides. Everything becomes black men versus black women, this side versus that side. Everybody's reacting to clips and sound bites without context, without nuance, without listening fully. I think that's one of the reasons people feel so disconnected now. Because people don't feel heard anymore. Everybody just wants to be right. But very few people are trying to understand. And I think reaction culture has made all of this worse. Because not everybody reacts instantly. Nobody sits with anything anymore. Nobody reflects. Nobody asks, why does this person think this way? What life experiences shaped this perspective? What context am I missing? Everything becomes immediate outrage, immediate division, immediate judgment. And social media rewards that. Algorithms reward conflict. Conflict gets engagement. Nuance doesn't. Patience doesn't. Understanding doesn't. And I think that's impacting relationships too. Friendships, families, dating, community conversations. Because people are listening to defend themselves, not listening to understand each other. And if we can't even communicate honestly anymore, how do we solve anything collectively? How do we build trust? How do we heal? How do we move forward as a community? And that's really why I wanted to create Q&A. Not because I got all the answers. I definitely don't. But because I think we desperately need spaces where people can think critically together again. Spaces because I think we desperately need spaces. But I definitely don't. But because I think we desperately need spaces where people can think critically together again. Not because I got all the answers. I definitely don't. But because I think we desperately need spaces where people can think critically together again. Spaces where people can slow down and really unpack conversations fully. Without every disagreement turning toxic. Without every conversation becoming performative. Without every opinion becoming warfare. Because life is nuanced. People are nuanced. And sometimes multiple things can be true at the same time. You can hold people accountable and still have empathy. You can disagree with somebody and still respect their humanity. You can hear another perspective without immediately feeling threatened by it. And I think we need more spaces that encourage that, especially in the black community. Because too much energy right now is going into division. And not enough energy is going into understanding. Not enough energy is going into healing. Not enough energy is going into rebuilding trust. And if we're really talking about success collectively, then those conversations matter too. Because what's the point of individual success if collectively we're still disconnected? What's the point of making money if mentally we're falling apart? What's the point of visibility if we don't feel seen as human beings anymore? What's the point of success if we lose our sense of community in the process? And maybe redefining success starts here. Maybe success isn't just about the money. Maybe success is emotional intelligence. Maybe success is healing. Maybe success is learning how to communicate better. Maybe success is learning how to build healthy relationships. Maybe success is learning how to regulate your emotions. Maybe success is learning how to protect your peace without disconnecting from people completely. Maybe success is becoming whole, not just becoming wealthy. Because there's a lot of financially successful people who are emotionally unhealthy. And there's a lot of emotionally healthy people who may never become wealthy, but still live deeply meaningful lives. And I think we need room to talk about both honestly, because life is bigger than aesthetics, bigger than branding, bigger than an image. And I think deep down, people are craving realness again. People are craving authenticity again. And maybe that's the bigger question I've really been sitting with lately. Maybe success isn't just about what we accumulate. Maybe it's also about what we sustain, what relationships we sustain, what peace we sustain, what integrity we sustain, what community we sustain, what purpose we sustain. Because eventually, money stops impressing you. Status stops impressing you. And what starts mattering more is alignment, peace, purpose, connection, impact, love, health, legacy. And honestly, I think a lot of people are quietly starting to realize that. So maybe success isn't just about making it. Maybe success is also about reaching back, building pathways, creating opportunities, creating spaces where other people can grow too, because somebody did that for us. And now the question becomes, what are we going to do for the people coming after us? This has been Q&A, Questions Need Answers, on WMBM AM 1490. I'm your host, Munch. I appreciate y'all for taking this journey with me today. Keep asking questions. Keep thinking critically. Keep challenging yourself. And most importantly, keep defining success on your own terms.